Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. It is so great to see you. Getting close to Pesach. We're going to be taking a hiatus after today's class. Over the course of Pesach, we'll come back, I believe, the Thursday after Pesach. I'll update everyone if we're going to take another week off then. But we're off for the next couple of weeks in terms of taking a well-deserved breather for everybody for Pesach. Um, Hopefully, everyone will have a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. I wanted to share with you a couple of case studies, and I'm not going to share so much of the screen, but talk a little bit about some of these case studies. Um, about the question, and usually it's termed machloket l'shem shamayim, the notion of the question of folks who live in worlds that disagree with each other, how they handle the nature of that disagreement. How they handle trying to navigate different worldviews on particular issues. And I'll use some examples. The specific things that I wanted to talk about come to the concept, what often is called Key of Outreach Observance, but really as a microcosm, using that as a paradigm, as a microcosm of a broader question or a broader issue of, with different people live different lifestyles, what's the nature of, on one hand, the approach to that lifestyle, on the other hand, the tolerance of understanding of difference and living together with that sense of difference and different approaches. So I want to present, starting with the approach that is probably going to sound somewhat less palatable to all of us, but I want to present this approach and showcase how it leads to a particular conclusion, and then be able to, work off of that to try and present an alternative approach. Again, it's interesting. Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, Zatzal of Yeshivat Har Etzion, when he would give a shiur, he would present a particular topic or issue, he would always start by presenting the opposing view. And not only would he present the opposing view, but he would present it with an impassioned, detail-oriented examination of that view as if he was its lawyer, to really advance it and present it with the vigor of somebody who really believed in it, so that when he presented his own view, it was from a place of intellectual honesty. So that's what I want to, again, obviously not to touch his shoes, but to approach it this way in the following way. So there is a mitzvah in the Torah, which says the following: you are required, as one of the 613 mitzvot, to rebuke, to rebuke your fellow. What is, again, that's a free translation, but what does the translation generally mean? So it's generally understood to mean that you have a responsibility when you see somebody doing something wrong to stop them from doing something wrong. It fits in with much of the discussions we've had in the past about the concept of lifnei iver lo titein michshol, don't cause somebody to do an avera. So you should therefore be proactive about making sure other people don't do avera. So on one hand, you could say, okay, that's what a police officer does, right? Is he or she are a law enforcement. They go and they enforce the laws. If somebody's speeding or somebody's stealing or somebody's doing something wrong, they enforce that. And they often inflict punishment in their law enforcement capacity. That's what that means. But if you're a spiritually sensitive Jew who reads the text in a spiritual, not simply a practical way, what it's also saying is that you have the obligation and the responsibility to impact people's, not just their practical life on a ben adam la makom, right? To not stop. You should stop people from stealing and stop people from murdering and stop people from doing all these terrible things to one another. You would equally, again, in this presentation of the approach, equally be responsible for people not violating spiritual laws, right? So you're equally responsible that people don't violate the law about not even, eating matzah on Pesach and not eating kosher and, following all the laws of Shabbat. You are responsible to um, uh, uh, act in a way that causes other people to make sure that they follow the mitzvot. Taking this a step further, the Gemara famously talks about, both in Shavuot and Sanhedrin and elsewhere, about the response. The Torah says that in general, ish bechet o yumat, you can never be responsible for anybody else's sin. You're only responsible for your own sin. However, sometimes you have this concept, Kol Yisrael arivim zeh bazeh, and that you have mutual responsibility. And the explanation given to how you deal with both of those cases, how you could ever have responsibility from others, because it says that they had the ability to make a stand against this, malfeasance, and they didn't, and therefore they bear responsibility. So you could actively say that the mitzvah means that you must stop other people from doing spiritual sins. And taken according to this approach, everyone has a responsibility to make sure that you get everybody else to keep Shabbat, and you get everybody else to keep kosher, and you get everybody to follow all the exact details of all the 613 mitzvot. That could, again, that's the way this approach would be presented in terms of that sense of leadership and responsibility, mutual responsibility. Let's take this a step further, right? You're working. You're hosting someone in your house, right? And they are going to come in, and you know that they don't follow the laws of brachot. Do you refrain from giving them any food? Because, hey, or do you say, I'm not going to give you any food unless you make a bracha? And this person isn't going to make a bracha. That's not, but you say that, they say, no, I'm not religious, so I don't have to. And again, just following this approach, you say, well, that doesn't do with anything. If you're Jewish, you got to follow the religion. I'm responsible to make sure that you don't do this and not eat this food without making a bracha. Right? Practical type of issue. Another interesting example, we talked about this in a different class, I think, that somebody comes to your house for a Shabbat meal, and they tell you about how they're being so inspired that they're being really careful on Shabbat to light Shabbat candles. And they arrive after nightfall. So now lighting candles is going to mean you are going to violate Shabbat to light those candles. Again, whether it's Neiver or do you act in a way that says, I'm sorry, I can't give you those matches to light a fire, which is a violation of Shabbat, even though you say you're doing it in a way to raise your spirituality. I can't allow you to raise your spirituality in a way that violates Shabbat. Or someone says, I want to have a seudat mitzvah, a meal of thanks to God. Right, a seudat mitzvah. I want to give thanks to God about some wonderful thing that's happened, right? And then they make the seudah with non-kosher food. Do you say, I'm not? I think you should not do this because you're trying to give a thanks to God in violating what I understand as God's laws by serving the non-kosher food. So you have all of these things that lie into that world, that delve into that concept of mutual responsibility. I've got to go ahead and stop other people from doing averot, be proactive about that, or maybe I'm not fulfilling my mutual responsibility. Now let's take this to a different side again within this approach, which is the concept of what's called Key of Outreach, etc. Should I be proactive on a mitzvah campaign to get other people to engage more in mitzvah observance? Or do I sit back in my own little dalet amot and say, I'm doing all the laws I can do, and I'm doing all the laws that I'm following, and everybody, I'm live and let live, let everybody do whatever they want, And it's not my problem or issue if they do a mitzvot or not. Or should I have to go on a crusade, mount a initiative, a quest to get more people to do more mitzvot? And by the way, we know, for example, the approach that Chabad has taken on this issue. That's absolutely the core of the entire Chabad philosophy when it comes to them setting up their infrastructure of going out and finding the people and finding them and getting them a way to do more mitzvot, observe in a stronger way. So the overarching approach that underlies what the thesis we're suggesting is this concept of mutual responsibility extending to spiritual life that says I'm responsible. I can't just sit back, and I'm responsible either in the negative way of stopping people or in the positive way of encouraging people to do more mitzvot. And that is a core of what our responsibility is of Jews. I will share with you a very interesting passage from, let me see if I can find it here, from the Chovat HaLevavot. The Chovat HaLevavot is a very powerful book that talks about literally the duties of the heart, the obligations that we have. And he raises a little bit of this question, and we're going to, again, approach it. The Chovat HaLevavot says, there is a concept of lama li v'letzara hazot. When evaluating if someone should take a leadership role, whether it's a communal leadership role, a family leadership role, a friend leadership role, there are many who say, says the Gemara, lama li v'letzara hazot. Why should I bother with the headache that comes with involving myself and sticking my nose into other people's business? Just let me live my life in peace. The Gemara has a very cryptic standpoint. The Gemara says, someone who would say such a thing, machriv et ha'olam, destroys the world. And what exactly is that Gemara trying to say? That you're machriv et ha'olam, that you say, lama li v'tzara hazot, if I want to just say, you know what, forget it, I don't want to engage with anybody, you want to be essentially a hermit, that you are destroying the world. So says the Chovat HaLevavot, and take a look at this, let's see if I can get it here. Take a look at this text. I have it in Hebrew and in English. Okay, look what he says. He says, let me just make sure I have the right thing shared. Okay, he says the following. Ra'oi lecha achi ladat. My brother, you should know. Kol zichuyot ha'ma'amin. All of the merits of the believer. Sorry about the background noise here. All the merits of the believer. Yeh magia latachlit will only reach their pinnacle, arachoka, b'tikun nafsho elokei yitbarach, to get your soul right with God, so to speak. But let's say you're a person, ha'karov l'malachim, b'midotav et ha'tavot. You, let's say, have worked on your own self, that your approach as almost angelic with your positive traits. You have worked on yourself to perfect your own sense of who you are, your own self, with your positive midot, to the point you reach the level close to the angels. You have great practices, great character traits. You work really hard at serving God. Eino kizuchuyot mi shemoreh bnei adam al derech hatova miyasher shemot avatat. You are not as worthy as the merit of someone who shows his fellow man the good and right way, who sets the evil on a straight path in serving God. For such a person's merits will be multiplied because of the merits of those he helped, increasing as they accumulate merits over time. Eino kischuyot mi shemoreh bnei adam el derech hatova umiyasher harashaim el avodat habareh. So such a person who doesn't spend as much time of perfecting every detail and every nuance of their own character, but rather spends time and effort and focus on influencing and supporting others to raise their spiritual game, so to speak, because you have an exponential effect. You have your own merit for doing good things, and you get credit, so to speak, for the merit of all the people that you then impact them to do good things. Think about what that says. That you cause other people to do good. Now, you've done a good thing. That's a nice thing. But you also, if they go and do a chesed, that chesed gets attributed back to you. Chachamim is saying something very interesting within this approach. Again, we suggested that the concept of that you are responsible for others' good and responsible to stop others from doing evil, both on in a interpersonal but also in a spiritual way, right? So the Chachamim is saying there is a utilitarian reason to do so. The utilitarian reason to do so is because there's a cascade effect of the positive effect. And you're going to achieve a lot more as a person when you influence others than you would achieve even perfecting yourself. You know, we say, it's exactly what the phrase in Pirkei Avot is meaning to say. That, of course, you got to focus on yourself, but if all you focus on yourself, you may achieve perfection in all of, I'm talking spiritually here, in all of your spiritual endeavors. However, you will fall short of the person who ends up taking leadership and influencing others. So that's all within this approach that says, yeah, you got to step out, you got to influence, you got to take a stand, you got to stop other people from doing things, etc. And I think it's a very powerful argument. It's a powerful argument if that's what Jewish leadership and God expects of us, that you are, again, responsible for utilitarian reasons, not just for the obligation reasons. It's the most effective way to get the most bang for your buck in your time on this world is by influencing others positively and stopping others' negative influences. However, and this is where I want to pivot to a slightly different approach, which is to distinguish between the negative and the positive. And while this may be true, that we have a positive responsibility to ensure that no one does evil and to ensure that as many people are doing as much good as possible, right? There is a distinction between the positive and the negative. And let me try and explain. When it comes to the concept of hocheach torchir hatamitecha, which is the mitzvah of quote unquote rebuke, right? Proactively stopping people from doing the wrong spiritual thing. There is an incredibly important caveat that is said in the Gemara on this, and it's said in two different ways. The first way it says is mutav sheyu shogegin va'al yu mezitin. Right, I'll say it again. Mutav, it is better that the people shall be accidental transgressors than they should be willing transgressors. What is that referring to? It's a very limited application, but when it is applied, it says the following. If you know somebody's doing something wrong, and you have a strong suspicion that no matter whether you tell them about it or not, they're still going to do that wrong thing, then the halacha says, keep your mouth shut. Why? Mutav sheyu shogegin va'al yu mezidim. Because you have to think 1-2 steps ahead. If you tell them, hey, you're not supposed to be doing X, Y, and Z, and you have a very strong suspicion that they're going to still do X, Y, and Z, do you know what you've done? Up until this point, when you kept your mouth shut, they've done such a X, Y, Z sin. They've done this sin accidentally, and therefore they have a limited liability for a sin they didn't, because they didn't know it was wrong. You've now told them it's wrong, and they continue to do it. Their sin now is compounded. And you can bear some responsibility for the compounding of that sin. Think about what this is saying. It's saying that mutav shiyu shogegin v'al yumezidin means that it is better to allow someone to sin in complete opposition of what everything we've just said for the last 15 minutes. Allow them to sin for a greater good. Their greater good, because they're going to be, instead of doing a minimal aveira because they are doing it b'shogeg, because they're doing it accidentally, they are doing it at least minimally, and you're mitigating the damage, the spiritual damage, so to speak, that's being done. That's the approach of mutav shiyu shogegin v'al yumezidim. If you take that a step further, there is an equally powerful Gemara in Sotah that says, are you familiar with this? And this is talking about the mitzvah of tochacha, the mitzvah of thou shalt rebuke thy fellow when they're doing something wrong. It says the following. Kishem shemitzvah lomar davar nishma. What this Mishnah, this Torah command is telling us is you have a responsibility to rebuke or constructively criticize, or whatever term you're going to use, when it is a davar hanishma, when you know you will actually make a impact of having that person change their behavior. However, you have that equal obligation to not say something that's a no nishma, that will not be listened to. The same mitzvah that says, tell somebody about what they're doing wrong, says, keep your mouth shut if you don't think that you're going to stop them from doing wrong. And this goes to the tshuva that I've shared in the past to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was asked the same question. I'm going to have somebody come to my house, and I'm going to obviously, welcome them and offer them something to eat. They're going to come to a meal at my house, and I know they're not going to make a bracha. And I know that I'm probably not going to be able to, at this stage in life, to influence them to make a bracha. What do? Do I take away all food? Do I not let them get a cup of water? He says, no, you let them have the cup of water. You let them have the food to eat. Even though they may be committing a sin, so to speak, by eating without the bracha, your impact on them will be far greater in the long run if you create a positive and welcoming environment. So much so, he actually places the following cheshbon. He says, you want to be technical about it? He says, you are going to, by forcing them to do the mitzvah of reciting the bracha, do you know what you're going to do? You're going to force them to do the aveira of thou shalt not hate another Jew. Right? You're going to cause them to end up committing a more heinous sin as opposed to the aveira they're doing by not eating the food that keeps the food without a bracha. Shlomo Zalman is saying this exact point, which is that you can't just say, "Oh, I'm responsible for doing, making sure somebody's spiritual well-being is taken care of, and that's my leadership goal and responsibility," where you may not achieve whatever your goal is, but you'll have a lasting consequence in some other way. Divrei, the great words are benachat nishmeim. And so in the situation of somebody coming and asking food and you're not getting a bracha, you say, absolutely. I create a welcoming environment because you think about the long game. And the long game is, to the more extent that you role model positivity and you act in a way that you feel will cause people to respond to you positively, then you'll likely think about things positively, get things in the long game, and you will achieve, you'll achieve the overall gains of making people feel connected. Yes, Suzanne, let's see if we can unmute.
where does what does Judaism say that המטרה מקדשת את האמצעים, that the
That's
goal
a great
justifies?
question.
Because
Yeah.
when we do keruv, there's always like we put a michshol into someone, but for the person it's not a michshol. It's for us maybe in our thought.
Great. So give me an example. Yeah.
Where does common sense enter Judaism when it's so strict
Mm-hmm.
sometimes?
So give me an example.
I should give you an example.
Yeah.
Well, if someone who is not observant is invited to see what the Shabbat dinner is, they know that he doesn't drive, they know that he doesn't usually eat kosher, he doesn't make brachot. So I mean, he doesn't do any more, and I didn't cause him to do it. It's only in my fine
Yes.
feeling.
Great example.
And
Great example.
I'm very knowledgeable of my Judaism, but I'm not very observant, let's say. So some people were very observant and invited me for Shabbat. So I declined because they were too far from me.
Mm-hmm. So this is a great point, and this has been something that
But I
obviously.
would do that, and I would never go and give my hand to a rabbi unless unless he puts his hand forward to say shalom.
Mm-hmm.
But I
So
mean,
it's a great question that you're asking, an issue that has been
if you know,
grappled
you
with.
can be very careful.
Yeah, I know it's an issue that's been grappled with for many generations in an overall way. The thesis that I'm trying to thread is that that exactly correct. That the idea of creating a positive environment where people see the beauty and the connection to something that will cause them to be more effective. You get more with honey than with thorns, whatever the phrase is. Exactly, creating that positive environment. Are there any lines though? Are there any lines that you don't cross? And there's a couple of different arguments about lines not to cross. For example, do you compromise your own standards on yourself in order to create a positive environment? And do you put yourself in a negative environment to potentially influence others? So I'll give you a practical example, right? You know that the people who are struggling the most with their spirituality, so to speak, are the people, let's say, that are hanging out in seedy locations, who are doing seedy things. Do you go and spend time there to try and influence them positively when you likely will, number one, be surrounding yourself in a negative environment that could impact you and dull your senses of what's right and what's wrong, right? The undercover cop example, right? The undercover cop needs to go into the back of the motorcycle, the gang or whatever. And so number one, they need to act and speak in a certain way that goes to, they have to speak in a way that goes to non-compliance with their personal moral standards. And you might say, okay, but they're doing it for the right cause. But you got to be careful, because doing a lot of wrong things, even for the right cause over time, habituates you to doing those wrong things. And you can even go to a point where now all your friends and all your peers are people who spend time in a gang. Are you going to change in a negative way because of that? And is there any red line you can't cross of, you don't imbibe the substances they imbibe. You don't speak in the way that they speak. You got to be in that world. So are there red lines you can not cross? So interestingly, there is an assumption within the discussion that we're having about Kiruv, etc., where you should always create the environment. If you create the environment, then you can somewhat set the expectations and the rules. So you are generally not allowed to violate any one of the mitzvot in the Torah on behalf of someone's spiritual elevation. You are, however, allowed to, in a certain regard, sometimes look the other way about their violation of an Aveira. And so, sorry about that. So because of their Aveira, so, you have a question of, for example, somebody comes to your house and they say, I haven't lit Shabbos candles yet. Can you light them for me? Can you light the Shabbos candles for me? Or, I'm really thirsty. I'd love a glass of milk as you feed them a fleshik Shabbat meal. Is that a delicate point of violating sort of this line where, so generally the approach of many poskim has been, even the poskim who are very much within this world and heavily promote doing things benachat and trying to affect and influencing people positively, say that you can never violate any of your own mitzvot, and some suggest even any of your own minhagim or standards, just because it might create a better, environment for the way that person feels. So, in the situation where are you inviting someone? So the Moshe Feinstein, his name is Shuva, where it says absolutely, if you have somebody who's a friend who's not observant, absolutely invite them for a Shabbos meal. Again, my mom's here. Growing up, we were a very warm, welcoming, oriented family. We had all sorts of people at the Shabbat table all the time. And there were times where there were different ways that they got to shul or whatever. When they were with us, we walked home from shul. And when we sat at our Shabbat table, we had the most welcoming and wonderful, great conversations with them. Would they say, okay, can I please have a ride home because I'm at your house for Shabbos? Can I please have a ride home? Please, can you drive me somewhere? Whereas had they been there on a Tuesday or Wednesday, we would have happily driven them home. But we would not do that for a Shabbat meal, because that's going over that red line of our practice is to observe Shabbat. And just because that person isn't observant, and it would be nicer for them to give them a ride a couple of blocks to their house or whatever it may be, we are not going to change our practices and our observances, just like we wouldn't eat not kosher in our home, or if they invited us to a place that would make them feel very comfortable around us if we ate, but they only offered non-kosher food, we would not partake. So the basic principle here is to navigate between, to recognize the responsibility that we have of influencing and impacting others, while at the same time, we have our responsibility, right? The Gemara Tota said, one who says, why should I bother with the community? Why should I bother with others? They destroy the world. And the Chovas Levavos' point of the zichuyot, the impact that you have on others, multiplies your own merits that you have in your own life, is a very, very powerful idea. The question is, there's one extreme that says, okay, so I go on this crusade and wag my finger at all the people doing the wrong thing. And we've suggested that that's not the right approach, even if it fulfills that concept of because the reason why that's not the right approach is because, number one, it doesn't work. And the Torah says, look at the long game about what's going to actually work. And number two, that's not actually the way the mitzvah is structured. What the mitzvah is structured is to do positive role modeling and to impact people in a way that makes them feel that they are welcomed and kind, and that there's a kind world that wants them to raise their own game and to elevate their level to the point where they actually will achieve things at their own pace and at their own level. There is a fascinating Orach Chaim on the pasuk in Parshat Bechukotai. Pasuk in Parshat Bechukotai says, saying that if you follow my statutes, and the mitzvot, tishmeru, you guard. The Orach Chaim suggests that those two terms, mitzvotai and chukotai, chukotai means my statutes, he says those refer to the letter of the law, the basic rules. And then the mitzvotai tishmeru, that refers to the shmirah, goes that extra step, that extra level of above and beyond. So the Orach Chaim suggests that there is this notion of a gradual, stepwise, thought out growth trajectory. A growth trajectory that says, I am right here at level A of following the laws. I'm not yet at level B of going to the nth degree XYZ extreme. And Torah says, great. Go at that level. Stay where you are. Don't skip steps. Don't skip rungs on the ladder. Get to that level of b'chukotai telechu, and then achieve at mitzvotai tishmeru. The corollary of the suggestion of the Orach Chaim is exactly, I think, what we're talking about, which is that don't start waving your finger at people because they don't do X, Y, and Z. Work with them to get to A, B, and C before you start telling them about, again, X, Y, Z. Which is why, for example, I don't know if going on, would vehemently oppose the approach taken by what they call the stone throwers on, who scream Shabbos on certain neighborhoods, right? So what do? They stand in the streets of their neighborhoods, and when anybody is driving, again, this is mostly in Israel, where most of the drivers are Jewish, anybody who's driving, they throw stones at them or throw projectiles at them, and they scream, Shabbos, Shabbos. Now, let's analyze that for a moment, what the background and rationale behind it is. The first issue may be just a privacy standpoint. We want a neighborhood that's quiet for Shabbos, and we're angry at somebody going in, so that's why we're going to stand up and make a stink. I would say that the truth lies a little bit further, which is that the justification for those individuals is we live in a Jewish country. These people are Jews. They're doing a terrible sin of violating Shabbat, and therefore I've got to stop them with whatever means necessary, literally finger wagging or throwing stones at them. That's what I got to do. That's the approach of the extreme of the first point that we said. So what I'd like to suggest, again, the thesis that we're suggesting is that there's several things wrong with that. Number one is that they're violating the other point, which is that those rocks on the technical level are muktzah, and they probably have been set aside ahead of time. The rocks are muktzah that they're throwing, so they are probably violating Shabbat themselves by throwing the rocks. But the secondary issue is that they're not fulfilling the mandate of hocheach tocheach et amitecha, right? They're not doing it right. The mitzvah of doing the appropriate kind of rebuke, and more importantly, they're achieving a negative goal. They're not stopping those people. Oh my goodness, somebody threw a rock at me while I was driving through their neighborhood. Now I'm going to have an epiphany and decide that I'm going to totally change my life and never and live the exact same lifestyle as the rock throwers. I've seen the light. The likelihood of that is pretty much, I can guarantee you, is zero. You are also violating various prohibitions. For example, chovel b'chavero, the prohibition of damaging other people's property in there. It's a dangerous thing. You can't hit somebody. You're not allowed to do that. And the last piece is that, like we said, it is actually not the way the mitzvah is supposed to be. The mitzvah is divrei daronot b'nachat nishmaim, that you're supposed to be speaking b'nachat. If you have such a goal for that person to observe Shabbat in the way you want them to observe Shabbat, throwing rocks ain't the way to do it. So I think, while we started with what could be seen as a rationale, a halachic framework that would lead one to get to the point of, okay, somebody's driving, I got to throw rocks at them to stop them from driving at any means necessary. Every time they press the gas pedal, they're doing another abayra. I better stop that from happening. We've, challenged that approach by saying those same sources that you're relying on to act in that way are actually the opposite and lead you to the opposite conclusion of not keeping, of not taking that action that you're taking in your pursuit of what you think is the greater observance of Shabbos. The a famous story of the Hasid Shoteh is exactly this to me, which is the famous story of the Hasid Shoteh, of the pious fool, the Gemara says. Why is somebody who is, you see someone drowning, but it's a man and he sees it's a woman and he feels uncomfortable about touching a woman, so he says, I'm going to let her drown. Right? That's a Hasid Shoteh. That's somebody using piety in an expression of what's actually foolishness. And that's what I think is the underlying concept here, where yes, we have a general mutual responsibility to impact others. But I would tell the person who's going to throw rocks at the guy on Shabbos, maybe that person should say live and let live. And they are not destroying the world. They're destroying the world if they never try to positively impact people in a way that will actually make a difference. So that's the thought process behind this nuanced middle ground approach. Now, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, right? Isn't there the concept of shtika kahoda'ah? Isn't there the concept of if I let something go by and say nothing, then I'm showing my tacit approval? So if I see somebody driving on Shabbos and I just let it fly with no impact, so to speak, am I saying I approve of driving on Shabbos? Right? How do you respond to such an argument who says, listen, the mitzvah of the Torah says I should stop people from doing averos. I'm going to stop them because how dare I not make a stand when somebody is doing something that I feel is inappropriate, right? That goes against my value system of the way I am meant to live my life. And so, that's that could be the argument made in favor of some of these more, less than palatable interventions. And to that, I would answer, that's exactly what the Gemara was dealing with when it says, Mutav Shiu Shogegin Volume Mizidim. The Gemara thought of this. The rabbis thought, the Torah tradition thought of this and said, you now have to balance the following factors of your potential impact and the value of your standing up and making a stink. No one's forcing you to drive in a time that you don't want to drive, but if you have to balance. Yes, we don't want you to stand up and scream, to stand up and say, yes, I support these quote unquote inappropriate activities. On the other hand, we don't. On the other hand, we don't say act in a way that's going to be counterproductive and counterproductive to your overall aim, right? When the person is doing the avera b'shogeg, which is the violation by accident, are you going to, and you could be faulted by keeping your mouth shut by saying it sounds like you're approving of the avera they're doing. The Gemara still says mutav shiu shogegin volume mizidim in limited circumstances, that you should still keep your mouth shut, despite the fact that somebody might think that you're approving of this, problematic activity. So again, there's a lot more questions than there are answers, but I think that this concept of the Torah is, saying, and it might be again, that's what the Gemara in Sota started with, saying it's a tough question, and it might just be easier to say, when in doubt, leave it out. Stay separate. Don't impact others. Don't try and influence or support or be involved in other people's events or affairs, because hey, listen, it can be delicate. It might not work. It might be counterproductive. It may lead you into places you don't want to be. But our suggestion is that each person, knowing exactly where they are and who they are and who the people they come in contact with, doesn't have the luxury to say, I want nothing about being the ambassador, nothing about. You have to be. It's just you have to do it with the sense of the chachma and the nachat that's appropriate. So with that, we'll end. I know it's a little bit earlier, but we'll end on a high note before Pesach, which is that we're all leaders, we're all ambassadors. We all have to carry that mantle of being or lagoyim, that approach of positive light to the people around us. We just got to do it with a way within this framework of not compromising on our own principles, but making sure that we that we recognize the comfort that we have to offer to people around us. With that, I wish everyone a Chag Kasher Sameach. We're off next week and the week after because of Pesach, and hopefully we will reconvene when we have good health and happiness for all of us.